go and you need to talk. You need to talk about, and you need to share this. So, you know, the purpose of memory is not simply to recall the past, but to ensure a more humane future. And so when we started, you know, we started the course and the program, and it was sort of a 5-day program. There were 25 participants, 14 countries, learned about the past, looked at the present, and tried to protect the future. And I think that's why we're all here, to protect the future. But what you can see is in this map here, where did the people come from that populated Auschwitz? You know, Auschwitz was the largest killing center, and Auschwitz wasn't just an Auschwitz, and we'll talk a little bit about what that camp was, but people came from all over Europe, including Russia, Italy, France, Germany, all the occupied areas, and Auschwitz was a center, and there were, you know, trains bringing people all the time to Auschwitz, which was part of the Germans killing infrastructure. So the week looked like, the first day we spent in Krakow. Krakow is a really very nice city. They had a thriving Jewish population pre-occupation. There are very few Jewish people that live in Krakow now, and there is one working synagogue, and there are other synagogues that are utilized for museums and whatnot. And so we spent some time in the Jewish quarter of Krakow, and then we moved on to the occupation. The Pogorzy ghetto, which was the ghetto in Krakow, also where Schindler's List was filmed, and Plasnow, which was the concentration camp in Schindler's List, which is not there's very little remaining of it except for the monuments. Then we spent a day in Auschwitz I, which I was very surprised about, and when we get to the pictures of what it looked like, and then days 4 and 5 were probably the most disturbing, and that's when you go to Birkenau, and day 5 was when you kind of looked in the infrastructure and the medical experimentation, the killing apparatus, the slavery. We talked a little bit about the non-Jewish victims, and there were many non-Jewish victims. It was really, I mean, the Jews got the worst treatment, the worst jobs. Those others that either spoke up were immediately removed to a concentration camp for re-education, and there were many others that were deemed, and the Roma or Gypsies, Soviets, Poles, people that were thought to be less genetically superior to the Germans were put, and there was they actually had these formulas that they'd use of how much slave labor they needed, and that sort of controlled what the population in these camps were. Some of the most disturbing things are some companies such as Mercedes-Benz and BMW and Bayer Aspirin and Siemens still exist today, and many Holocaust victims were used during the war effort to get these companies for free labor. So there were so many accomplices to this, and you can see as we go through some of them that were camps. Farben built Auschwitz III just for the purpose of German slave labor to build chemicals, and they built a chemical plant. The government and Farben, knowing that they didn't ask questions, that they bought the labor, they paid the government, the German government, for the labor. Of course, the laborers didn't get paid. there were good people too that did what they could. There was no, but most of this was just on a scale that it was slavery throughout Europe, and then finally post-war, and the liberation. So Krakow, the Jewish people settled in Krakow around the 13th century. You know, and I don't need to tell this group, but the persecution of the Jewish people began probably, you know, with the beginning of the Roman Empire. But in 1495, there was a royal decree that the Jews needed to locate in a place called Kazimierz, which became the Jewish quarter of the city of Krakow. It was very vibrant. It was a very vibrant. There's the synagogue there, and so what you can see is this is the Jewish quarter of Krakow. We'll talk a little bit about the occupation, because what the Nazis did, because they were sadists, really. I mean, they rather than, when you say there's a ghetto, they did not make the ghetto in the Jewish quarter. They made everyone move across the river with all their stuff, or whatever they allowed them, 100 kilos or 50 kilos, and put them up in a place. Maybe I have a picture of it, you know, that was much smaller and much more inconvenient. Pre-war, which is, you know, not even 100 years ago, there were about 70,000 Jewish citizens in Krakow. Now there's less than 1,000 Jewish people in Krakow. And here you can see these are two other synagogues. This is actually become a museum, and this is the Jewish Community Center here. That was a synagogue. So then the second day we went into the ghetto, and this is kind of from what you see from Schindler's List. But you can see, as I talked about before, people had to cross the river from Kazimierz, which was the Jewish quarter, to the ghetto, which was across the river, bring all their things. I think they were given 7 to 10 days to do so, load as much as they could onto wagons, and they built, you know, walls. They were literally walled in. And these walls were guarded by not only the Germans, but the Polish police as well. And some Jewish police people that they kind of grabbed and said, okay, you're the sentry here, and put people in very difficult situations where they had to make decisions that none of us would ever have to want to make those decisions. And they built them, you know, they built them like tombstones. So you can see that the walls of the ghetto are built like tombstones. I mean, they were foreboding, they knew that this was a temporary arrangement, and that that people were coming here to die. So this is a picture. Obviously, the walls are not there anymore, but this is still there, the remaining wall of the ghetto in Krakow. And again, this is the trek that people had to make to get to the ghetto. And this was then when they liquidated the ghetto, they would let everyone know, and they would do these things either, you know, on the eve of Yom Kippur, or always on a Friday. You know, they would do these things intentionally to demoralize people and pick the days that they that meant something, and then they would make people just trek across town to a train station. And this is the square in it's called Hero Square, where they have empty chairs, symbolizing those people that were taken away and never came back. In the ghetto, there was one person that was allowed to stay and keep their business there, and one non-Jewish person who was a pharmacist. And the Germans let him, because there was no supplies or anything, and the Germans let this person, stay to provide medications to the people in the ghetto, and he provided a lot more, and alibis, and would take children and hide them and send them. And at this point, they were sending people to England, people that would allow their children to go to England, and they never saw them again. But the children grew up well and were part of the kinder transports. And this pharmacist, and the pharmacy is that yellow building now, or that's where it was housed, who did a lot of good, a Polish pharmacist. And so this is Plasnow. Plasnow doesn't exist now. It's a big kind of park and monument, sort of like Valley Forge. But here's a photograph of the workers. And again, these are women who are pulling these humongous carts by hand, even though the technology existed that this didn't have to happen. There was better technology. The idea was that the work would be grueling, exhausting, and eventually fatal for people. And on January 14th, 1945, they closed this camp as the Russians were coming in, and the last inmates were brought over to Auschwitz. This is the camp from Schindler's List, and there is the house where the commandant lived, the one that was that, if you remember, shooting people from his balcony, and that was the balcony and the house where he would look out on the workers, and then this is that stairwell where you remember the child was hiding. And then this was Schindler's factory. It didn't look like this then, but it has turned into a museum, and there are pictures outside of every person that Schindler saved, and their photographs, and so it's really kind of I won't say happy, but it's gratifying to see that there was some positive, not positive, but some better outcomes for some people. And then day 3, I should say we stayed there at Auschwitz. So there is a youth center, a hostel there on the grounds of Auschwitz, which is right outside of crematory number 1. And it's a youth hostel. I mean, it's like any youth hostel, but they get so many, people traveling that the museum built a hostel, and so that's where we stayed. Auschwitz was originally built as a Polish military base. So when you look at it, it doesn't look like, a concentration camp, typical of the German concentration camp. It was established by the Germans then initially for prisoners of war, political prisoners. And I think when the Poles took over and invaded, or when the Germans took over and invaded Poland, what they initially did is took anyone that was what was intelligent, and they moved them over to Auschwitz. So they were your academics, your clerics, your political, the people in political offices, anyone that they thought could be thought leaders and threatening to the German people. It wasn't until later that it turned into the death camp. And you can see here's the crematoria here, and this was where we stayed here, right? It's cut off there a little bit, but this is how we walked to class every day. So we would walk through the gates. The one thing that struck me, and it's sort of sobering, is it sort of looks like a college campus. And so one of the things that sort of bothers me, having come back, and if I hadn't spent a week there, that people don't appreciate the terror because it doesn't look that bad. The lawns are manicured, the trees are kept, everything looks like you're in college. And they're bringing these kids through to educate kids on the Holocaust, and they're walking through like Disneyland. Rather than kind of understanding, I think it takes more than just a walk through Auschwitz to understand exactly what happened in this place, because a day tour won't do it, right? And again, it's set up very efficiently so that it can handle thousands of people a day coming through, and it's very, very well preserved. But again, you can see the guard towers, you can see the electrified, 2 rows of electrified fences. I mean, it was very, very difficult to escape. And people, there were some successful escapes. Those, most of them were when people were sent out to work duty. Most people couldn't escape from here. There were some that would do, that would kill guards, take their uniforms and dress up, or there would be a truck coming out and they would hide in the back, or people would hide people in food containers, or the Germans robbed them of all their possessions, so they'd send all the possessions of value back to Germany, and people could hide in those possessions to get out. Once you got out, there was nowhere to go. You couldn't walk up to somebody's door and say, "Help me," because the story had been played out that these are all our enemies, and there was incentive to turn people in, to bring them back. So many people with heroic escapes just wound up back, and then of course the punishment was almost always death. So the Nazi concentration camp system was vast. There were at least 44,000 concentration camps throughout occupied Europe. Auschwitz being one of the biggest, one of the most well-known. What the Germans did do is that they kept the killing camps outside of Germany and Austria. So the killing camps, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Belzec, these were where your gas chambers were. These others were just concentration camps. A lot of death, a lot of starvation, a lot of abuse. Dachau eventually had a gas chamber put into it, and that's right outside of Munich. Was never used. And by the time that was done, they were losing the war, and they started to dismantle any evidence. But you can see where people came to during the Nazi occupation, and from France all the way over to the Soviet Union, all these people were kind of shipped over here to Poland for extermination. So the camps were initially served as forced labor for the wall. And the concentration camps all had the Germans had a term for them, KL. So it would be KL, Auschwitz, KL, Dachau, and that was the German acronym for concentration camps. And then they evolved into the final solution. At first they were just sort of to segregate the Jewish people and to use them as forced labor. These are a few things that I think are interesting, and I think this is the kitchen, and here's a picture of the kitchen when it was active. The orchestra was outside the kitchen. Many talented people were brought to Auschwitz, and many brought their instruments with them. And the Germans created a band, and the band would play when people marched out to work and marched back. They also played when transports came in and people got off the trains. Working in the kitchen was one of those assignments that most people that survived say saved their life. because you had access to food, which was very rare, and you worked indoors. And so they were the things that really killed people, the elements and starvation, if it wasn't the Nazi guards. And then here you see the platform and a selection process here, where there's a garden. I think I have another picture of this. They would segregate the women and children and the men, and then people would walk up, and then they would make the decision whether they were to be registered in the camp, which meant photographed, tattooed, or whether they would go directly to what they had said were the showers, which were the gas chambers. So the prisoners' quarters, again, these are the prisoners' quarters in Auschwitz. They were built for army, for Polish military people. So I mean, there were 2 people to a bed, except when they got full, then they put as many as they could. But it doesn't look horrible. It sort of looks like a summer camp. It doesn't look, when you get to Birkenau, you'll see the squalor, more squalor. But again, you can see the paintings of these are prisoners, and they weren't allowed to have chalk or pencil or pens or paper, but they could get it. And especially many people, because this just registering these people, thousands of people arriving a day, this was work that the Germans didn't do, that the prisoners did. And so some would have access to pens or papers or whatever, and some would draw. And this is some of the testament that these drawings were actually buried, because you couldn't be caught with them. But people knew enough to bury things, and then those that were liberated would tell people where they were, or that during excavation they would find. So they would find the band, people marching out to work, the band, the famous gates, and again, this is Auschwitz. This is the house where the commandant of Auschwitz lived. And I don't know if anyone saw the movie The Zone of Interest. So that's the house there, with the garden and the trees and everything that you see in that. And again, this is the toilets and the sinks in Auschwitz, not Birkenau. But I wanted to show the difference. There was a block, and there were toilets, sinks running. The water wasn't clean, but there were these facilities that people were allowed to use twice a day. Then this is probably the most chilling. As you walk in, you can see that this was the initial first gas chamber in Auschwitz, and people would walk in. Again, it was built underground. People went in thinking they were going to get a shower, and this was the actual gas chamber. And you can just see it's been kept, the scratches on the walls, and what people were just dying and trying to escape, which there was no escape. There were a few people that escaped the gas. They didn't die, and then they would shoot them if they didn't die through the gas. But people went in like this, thinking they were going into a shower, and then the door would close. There was a little something that they would cover the peephole, and then these were the vents where they would put the Cyclone B or the gas in. And then these were the crematoria. So you can see then it was just a process. This is what the vents for the gas look like from the inside, and this is sort of the exit, if you will. The scratches on the walls, and here is the noose where the commandant of Auschwitz was hung. So they hung him right after the war, and they hung him right at the entrance of the gas chamber. And cell block 10 was the medical tent hospital, and again, it was little more than a dissection table, Neil, you know, with some plumbing, and this is where people would go for, again, the big medical experiments they did here. One was sterilization. They wanted a non-surgical way to sterilize women. And so they would use caustic. They would inject caustic chemicals into fallopian tubes. They did a lot of experiments on twins, midgets, and some hyperbaric experimentation, and hypothermia to try to use the prisoners to see how people would respond to extremes to make it better for their soldiers. And this was the wall of death. So this is where if someone were to be sentenced to death, then this is where they would bring everyone out to roll call, and then they would shoot them. They would shoot them against that wall. And again, many people were, you know, Karl Clauberg was the gynecologist that would conduct the medical experiments to try to have a way to make people sterile. So that was Auschwitz I, and when you go to Birkenau, it's a completely yeah. There's no microphone here. Thanks. It's a completely different field. This is huge. This was built initially. This was built for Soviet prisoners of war. Turned into really the killing center for the Jews, with 4 crematoria, 4 gas chambers. Over 1 million people died here, mostly Jewish. It had a capacity of about 200,000 people. This is probably the most famous picture. Again, this is probably a mile or 2 away from the Auschwitz that we just looked at, Auschwitz I. And if people were to be transported, mainly they would walk if they had to be sent to another camp or whatever. But again, it looks, most of it has been torn down. Some of the buildings have remained, but you can see the extent of Birkenau. And one of the things, there are very few of these left over, but these were the cattle cars where the transports took place. And you can see there's no ventilation. We were able to get some photographs of, and many of these were from my colleagues that were in the course with me. I can't claim to have taken all these pictures, but that, you know, could look in and see certain things, maybe a little bit of a ray of light or a crack here or there, but there was no aeration. There was no, very little sanitation. There was no sanitation. There was a bucket that was changed every time they stopped. The bucket was changed unless there was another bucket put in for water that, if it was fresh or not, and it was rarely changed. That many people, up to 10%, died during transport, so they didn't even make it. And then again, here's a prisoner's rendition of what happened, you know, once they got off the trains. And then here's what's called the Juden ramp, or the Jewish ramp, and this is where they built a train kind of track, and they would bring the Jews out. They would have them go through selection. Many people would look and say, okay, well, people didn't know they were being sort of, what this was, right? They kind of thought they were being resettled. And so they brought their stuff. But then these prisoners showed up, and the prisoners many times spoke the same language as the people that were being transported, and kind of would say, run, get out of here, this is, and these prisoners, they were in charge of collecting all their belongings. So I think we'll see it a little later where when you were in a transport, you were allowed a suitcase, and then you would write in white paint or chalk on the suitcase your name and the transport number that you were in. And that's what they were told, so we can get this back to you once you resettle. That was kind of their luggage tag, if you will. But of course that never happened, and they would just take these and sort them later. But here is, you can see here, this is a person actually being selected to go to the right, meaning to go to the gas chambers. So the doctor, whoever that was screening people to see could they work or not. And people had many ways the prisoners would, they would lie about their age, or they create skills that they knew were needed. And say, yes, I'm a carpenter, or I can do munitions or things like that. Like, people were smart enough to know at this point, when they saw the elderly and children all go to one side, that work meant, at least some more days of survival. Most people, when they got here, depending on their jobs, wouldn't live a month or two, just because of the conditions. And again, this is a rendition of exactly what happened and what the process was. So people would come in, they'd go down the stairs and undress into the gas chamber here and be gassed and killed. Then there would be an elevator that brought their bodies up here, where people would work on them to remove gold fillings and anything that might be of value from their bodies before they went into the crematoria. The prisoners who worked in the crematoria, they were treated. Very few of them lived, but they lived separate from the rest of the prisoners, because what they had witnessed they could not share with the prisoners. So they needed to work. So they worked 12-hour shifts cremating bodies. So they were fed a little better because they needed this workforce, this supply, and they actually became efficient in burning bodies, knowing how to stack bodies up that they would burn quick and those kind of things. It was really disturbing. And so that was kind of the whole process of the Birkenau gas chambers and crematoria, and there were 4 of them. Only one is still standing, and this is it, the remains of it. Most of them were destroyed. This one, the prisoners, this is brilliant. So the prisoners were sent out, again, to work in the area in munitions plants, and mainly the women got the inside jobs, and they would bring gunpowder in under their fingernails because they were all searched. And it took literally years, but they had enough gunpowder to stage a revolt. And so what happened in crematoria number 4 is the prisoners revolted, and they blew up the crematoria. Several got away, many got away, most were brought back or killed, but some survived the war. But this was the ingenuity that people used, and there were people that could organize. And yet, if anyone even got wind of it, you would be tortured and arrested and forced to give the names up of those people that were your collaborators. There's a photograph of the crematoria. Um, and here, this is the little red house, or maybe the yellow. Before they built the crematoria, there were a couple houses on the presence of Birkenau where they would use for gassing people. And so they would block up all the windows and make it airtight, and then they would bring the victims in, and they would gas them in these houses. There was a red house and a yellow house, and this is the site of one of them. And then they would dig massive pits and just bury them outside, or burn them outside. And so this is a kind of an interesting concept. This is called Canada. Anybody know what that was? So Canada is a place where your battery's running dead. You may want to plug in the computer. So Canada was, and this was a name given by the Jewish prisoners. Canada, the people that also survived were the people that got to work in the sorting, because people would pack all kinds of food or money. Money could be used for bribes, particularly if you could get somebody that was with the outside world. So the people that worked in Canada, their job was to sort things to send back to Germany. And they would sort clothes, shoes were big, blankets were big. There were a lot of food that people would bring with them. Thank you. And so they called it Canada because there was a sense that Canada had anything you wanted. And basically here in this warehouse was anything you wanted that people would just bring with them, because they thought they were resettling their whole lives. And much of this was stolen by the Germans and sent back for people in Germany. Interesting that if you were caught, obviously if you were caught stealing, you were killed, but even the German officers, if they were caught stealing from this, were also punished. The Germans were very serious about that this was property of the German government. This was not property of the army, or certainly not property of the people the victims. And this is actually what the inside of Birkenau looked like. And this was a photograph just after liberation of actually what it looked like and what it looks like now. What you can see, the top on the top right, well, am I right? I guess you're left. Dave Sachs, I don't know. How is it? Is it right or left? I don't know. Or Dr. Perlmutter's here. What is it? Whatever. Anyway, up there, that's the latrines. That's the latrines in Birkenau. Believe it or not, this was one of the best assignments to get for two reasons. Cleaning, you had to clean the latrines every day, and people were allowed to use them twice a day. The one is because it was indoors, and two is that it smelled so bad the guards would never come bother these people. So you kind of, even though it was a degrading, horrendous job that people got, people would cite it as the reason they survived, because they were inside and no guards would come in and bother them. But every day they would have to clean. They would have to clean the latrines. These were the bunks, and there are still some barracks with bunks, still set up, and each barrack had some heat. There was, you can see, these are very long, and there was some coal every day that would be put in the furnace, and it was supposed to heat the entire barracks. The kitchen at Birkenau is still in existence as well. It's still there. And again, here's an area. This was taken by the United States government. This photo of a reconnaissance mission of when they were looking at what was going on here. People knew, and have documentation of this is what the camp looked like. And these are what they were built to look like stables, with the only light and air coming in up top. And you can see the two chimneys from the furnaces there. And then roll call. Roll call happened twice a day. So roll call, people would get up generally in between 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning. There would be some time allowed to use the bathroom. There would be some weak walnut coffee given out, and then people would stand for roll call. And roll call was one of the most really gruesome things that would happen, because people would stand for hours while they would count every prisoner. And if it was wrong, they would start again, and people would die or pass out. And they would, even if they died, their fellow prisoners would have to bring their bodies out so the bodies could be counted. Because if they were one off, they would think that someone escaped, and this is how they would determine whether there was an escape or not. And again, this is the liberation. This is the liberation of Auschwitz, which was, January 27th, 1945. What you'll see here is almost artificial. So it's important to note that these people seem to be smiling, the prisoners, and not all of them. When the Russians liberated Auschwitz, unlike when Eisenhower did, liberated Bergen-Belsen, when the Russians liberated, they didn't have any photography equipment with them. They didn't know what they were facing. They kind of went, and it wasn't till it took them time to get that equipment. So they didn't really walk into people cheering or whatever. These people didn't know what was. They didn't know they were Russians. They didn't know what their fate would be under the Russians. I mean, the Russians haven't, they were sort of scared too. It wasn't until a few days later where the Russians had really set up some heroic things to save people's lives and to do things that they felt more comfortable. So you'll see a lot of these photographs of Auschwitz, of the liberation of Auschwitz, are a little older than that actual day that it was liberated. Unlike some that when the Americans liberated, Eisenhower sort of knew it would be denied and brought a lot of film crew and documentation from the very beginning. About 7,000 people were in the camp and when it was liberated. And so this was one of the things that, again, I talked a little bit about the victims and the proof of crimes, and these are just the artifacts that are left over that the people at the museum painstakingly preserve to really show as proof. And you can see the suitcases with the transports and the people's names on it. Other things, glasses. You'll see prisoner uniforms. These are the cans of the Cyclone B, or the cyanide gas. These are some propaganda. Every suitcase, believe it or not, and we saw the museum, and they have this really state-of-the-art way to categorize and preserve artifacts. But every suitcase has a number and a date, and they look in them, and it's amazing what you see. Many people would find in the suitcases, they would pull out the lining and they would find money, or letters, or photographs, or things like people knew that valuables would be taken from the suitcases, but they go through a lot, and they still have many more to go through. And then again, suitcases. These are just shoes that you'll see, eyeglasses, artificial limbs, bowls that remain at Auschwitz of the victims. And then the prisoners did art, and we talked a little bit about what, some of these testaments to what happened. Some of these paintings were painted afterwards of their recollection, but many were done during the time, and people would paint and then hide their artwork. And then finally, I think that they ended kind of talking and making sure that we knew how these things happen, and again, it didn't happen at the top there with genocide. It happened with the attitudes, the bias, the anti-Semitism, and then the acceptance and the ability to act on those biases and to segregate people, and then discrimination becoming the law and people accepting it, then the violence, and then finally death didn't really mean anything. And this is the class. They were really great people that I got to learn from and with during that week. And there are memorials. There's an urn with ashes and the memories. And I believe that's it, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions or answer anything I can. Thanks for your attention. Yes, doctor.
Who goes to this?
So it was.
It was not for doctors only.
Oh no! Actually, I was the only doctor there. There were a lot of different people that went for a lot of different reasons. Some were educators that taught high school, college, the history of the Holocaust, and others were people. A friend of mine, Raya, who lost several relatives here and really wanted to experience where they were, where they died. Many people had personal connections to what was going on. There were two young ladies one was from Miami, the other was from Boca Raton, who were heads of their Jewish federations in their towns, and went to bring things back. So people from all over the world, some retired people, but everyone shared. Not everyone shared the same views, but everyone really shared a passion for learning about this and making sure that it doesn't repeat itself. Yes.
First of all, tremendously admire your willingness to persist 3 times to go and to take a week of your life to do that, and then sharing it. Curious question: what did you learn there that really surprised you that you didn't realize or know before going?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. So what did I learn before I went that was surprising? I think the most disturbing thing I learned was that nobody did anything. That kids would go to school and come back and their families would be gone and nobody thought anything of it. Or people would fight to move into their homes. And there was some talk after liberation, particularly in Krakow, where people would go back to their homes and, no, this isn't your house anymore. This is my house. And, and not being welcome. And these people were welcomed by no one, or people escaping these brutal conditions only to be turned in. It's not, you would think to just escape here would be, but then there was nowhere to go. And I always wondered, you know, it's interesting, Vic, you say that. I say to myself, everywhere I went, how would I have escaped? This wouldn't have happened to me, because what would I have done? Nothing. Nothing. You wouldn't. Your family, I mean, you had your family held over your head. You had, you know, where would you go, right? Unless you could, or you could emigrate or whatever. People had no option. They literally had very few options.
There was a lot of deception on the part of the Nazis. They managed to deceive the victims first and foremost, and unfortunately, really, Jews did not know. As you said, they came.
Well, I think there's always hope, and that's why people live, because they had that hope. So if you read Viktor Frankl or whomever, people had the hope. But there were people that were on the trains and they hoped. Maybe those stories are wrong. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe this is going to, if I do this, maybe it's going to turn out okay, you know? And believe that up until the fact that there was no, when they got in and there was no water in the shower. And, you know.
And when they heard stories and verified by eyewitnesses and so on, they still did. It was so beyond any
beyond.
scope of belief that they'll reject it. Of course, as you said, they wanted to have a hope and so on. And that was true also for the Jews in the United States. It took really a lot of effort and work to convince even the leadership here that something is really happening there.
Yeah, Roosevelt didn't create any program to the very end of his life, quite frankly, you know, whereas those pictures that they have, the United States government knew. And the Russia, I mean, people knew. People were just disappearing. They weren't coming back. Yes, sir.
In the same vein as the discussion going on right now, was there any talk about why the Allies never bombed the railroad tracks? Because all of the camps were located by tracks, and that's how the prisoners were transported.
That never came up. I mean, it came up. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. It seemed like bombing the crematoria, bombing the railway stations, you know, there were acts of sabotage, you know, for the railways, but obviously that was the whole infrastructure that these transports happened. Now, before the transports happened, they actually, particularly in Poland, they would go into a town and then they would just bring everybody and shoot them, you know, although people did have a chance of escaping or whatever, but there were these squads that would go out after the army conquered the town. The squads would go in, mainly the SS, and they would just round up people and they would kill them. Some of the stories you heard of people. Well, let me ask a question. Has everyone here met all four of their grandparents? No, I haven't. And there are people that didn't know their grandparents were Jewish until the Nazis came for them and said, "You're 25% Jewish." No, I'm not. I grew up. I went to that. And no, you are. Somebody said and whatever, and they were brought off. Again, it was all like this person's, you know, there's somebody here or there's somebody there. There wasn't really it was just sadistic wanting to just kill people. Yes.
For me, the most interesting of your wonderful talk, the slide before with the
Pyramid?
pyramid, and almost again, the evolution of biased attitude. I have never seen anything like that. From biased attitudes to, the final solution. That impressed me so much. Thank you. Did you learn, you talked about that?
And that's
Yes. Yeah, definitely. You know,
Such a great teaching tool.
it's teaching. This was the last day too, which maybe, and there is a part two, not next year, the year after. Again, there's an application process. Not like you just automatically get accepted, but that I I hope to be able to go to where I think they will dive into this more. This was like the very last day of what is the message you're going to take home. Yes.
I just want to mention that what we see here happened in Germany pre-war and during World War II in a relatively short period of time. The genocide idea did not occur, maybe he wanted it, but he didn't plan and didn't have it in his.
No, it wasn't originally his thing. His original thing was Juden-free. He wanted them to go somewhere. And then
discrimination, then maybe the violent, what you put there below genocide, that is the Kristallnacht, and before
Yeah.
that, Jews thus were fired from university. They were marginalized from society and many, and so on. It's progressed very quickly, and that's what's important to
It
remember.
was
that
very
we
quick.
can move very quickly from biased attitudes
And
to
this, and you know,
actual
the
genocide.
collaborators, many countries, even the Poles, there were collaborators. There were people like, oh, yeah, I'd love that house. We're going to move into that house now that it's vacant there. And so it wasn't, I guess the message is that we can't accept any of this.
Did they talk about the Wannsee conference?
Yeah. Well, they talked a little bit about it. You mean when the decision was made that now we have this problem, we can't go to Madagascar, which I think was one of their plans. And again, the United States, Great Britain, a lot of countries slow rolled the visa process. If they at all, they weren't helping.
They used the word attrition, by the way, at the Wannsee conference. They had the number of Jews everywhere, how many there were, but how many they would get to the concentration camp, minus attrition. That's the word. The number of people who would die
On the way.
intentionally or expectedly on the way there.
So when you got to Auschwitz, there was.
I ran sales conferences with more passion and emotion than they did at that conference. If you actually read the minutes, it's disgusting.
Oh, wow. Yes, Donna.
Were any of your colleagues who participated in this, did any of them lose relatives in the Holocaust? And if they did, were they at any of the camps that you visited?
Yeah, Raya did, and we went and took a walk. We took a walk to the, I forget, she'll tell me, it was either the yellow house or the red house where her aunt was murdered. And she was able to kind of trace that back and understand.
I went to college with some of my best friends who lost their grandparents, and I've never asked them if they'd gone over there and gone back. But
And
I
the
imagine
records
it's still
are, I mean, although many were destroyed, there are a lot of records, and there is a big room in Auschwitz where there's this huge book, and you can look and see was your relative registered there. Yes, Rabbi.
One of the things that seems to be not so apparent is if the goal of extermination wasn't at the beginning of the plan, yet it took time to build all the facilities to accomplish this. So that seems like a little bit of a disconnect, because those ovens didn't appear at the drop of a hat. It took time. Now, granted, Auschwitz was already built to some extent, but that was one camp.
No, I think you're right. And here, I think this is it. There's a receipt for the crematoria where they kept a receipt because there was a company that built these. And they would say, they would put on the work order, need X amount of crematoria. And it would go somewhere and some factory would build it. People knew, right? What are you using all those crematoria for? Well, people are dying of typhus. Yes, Reverend.
So, a year ago, October, I was in London, and I was doing research at the Holocaust Library in London. found documents from 1924 that laid out the process, and it included extermination. It wasn't written by Hitler, it was written by, I can't remember the guy's name, who became a big deal among the Nazis. But I think that
Who was it?
some of them,
But it was,
I don't know. For some, maybe it wasn't
the
long term,
idea of
but for some it was. And as I sat there reading this, I kept gasping, like reading it, and the librarian came over, I said, I don't want to get too now. I said, this is what's happening in my country now. And she said, we know.
Yes.
I think
Okay.
a comment as
Thank
to the timeline, I think if you go back and you track it, you'll find once the Germans started to get bogged down in 42, that's when the final solution was devised in Munich and Berlin, excuse me.
When the war turned.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that was sort of, yes, that was a turning point.
But when you
for this.
think of a 3-year period in which how many thousands of centers were constructed and implemented?
Well, the other thing is the
Mind-boggling.
Hungarians, I mean, that was 2 months. 2 months at the end of the war. I mean, and the entire, or almost the entire Hungarian Jewish population was exterminated. Yeah, in a very short time, all done here. Yes.
So Steve made a great segue to my question, which is, we have statistics that say that in the last 5 years, we're coming to present day now, in the last 5 years, anti-Semitism has increased by 300%. So I'm
In the United
curious
States
as,
alone? Are you talking worldwide or in the US?
I believe that's a worldwide number. But I will double check that. So what are your thoughts after this experience that you had in terms of what do we need to do in schools, in Jewish communities, in non-Jewish communities, in communities, in organizational leaders throughout Berks County? What is your vision for sharing this with more people and affecting, hopefully, some kind of reduction, perhaps, in that number?
Well, one, I'll talk to whoever, and that's why I thank you for having me. And two, I think it's certainly curriculum, public policy. Donna, you're shaking your head. I think that, when the I'm not going to go into politics, but public policy, somehow we're becoming immune to a lot of things, right? Like you would think after what happened in Pittsburgh, that would have stopped, right? Like that we would have instead, you go places and now people have to have guards outside for worship services. And people are immune to that. And I think that that's one thing. I think that the curriculum needs to really address this, address anti-Semitism and there are other populations that are marginalized. And so we sort of accept it. And I think the computer age is a little, like I was blessed because I grew up with my next door neighbor. We knew Jewish people my whole life, and some people don't. And now the kids go to school online and they don't socialize except with anyone, and so people don't understand. The propaganda's terrible. So you know, I don't know, but I will, you know, I'll share this, my experience.
The pyramid back up.
Right.
a second.
And who developed that pyramid?
So
I
we
will
are
look,
here
it's
now
on
talking-
there somewhere, but I'll
we're here
get
now
it.
Talking about the tip of the pyramid, maybe below it once. But if we're gonna stop it, we have to get to the base of the pyramid.
The blue.
We have to go to the blue. And the key word there is bias. Not
Yes.
anti-Semitism, but bias. So if you have school training that eliminates bias or allows people to question some of the conspiracy theories, et cetera, that are going around, you won't get to the tip of that. But until we deal with the bias, which mostly has to be in schools, K through 12, because by the time, and we're all talking about what's happening on the Penn campus or Columbia and all that, it's too late. It's too late. Because people go at 18 years old with views, and all you can hope to do is that the administration, these colleges will stop the violence, but they're not gonna change the attitudes. And so it's got to start very low, and so you end up dealing and helping to avoid not just anti-Semitism, but Islamophobia, homophobia, misogyny, and all those other issues.
We have wonderful resources, and sometimes it's a matter of getting all of those resources together in one place at one time. Penn State has an amazing program going into schools. It's not enough utilized, I think, in Berks County. The Berks Military History
Well, you
Museum.
had somebody from Penn State that
Yes,
came and
yes.
spoke. I was there, yeah, yeah.
And the program I just referred to is in place in Wyomissing School District now, and in the Reading School District in the middle school. And thankfully, we have a very fine state senator, I don't know if anybody knows her, but who has supported this and is getting state funding for this. But there's 105,000 public school teachers that have to be trained, and we're doing a great job, but we're dealing with hundreds rather than tens of thousands.
Yes.
This is we're running late now, but I want to echo something that Vic said and point it out a little more is, let's not just focus on the anti-Semitism, because we can be, as Jews, just as judgmental and discriminating, etc. And I think when you look at that pyramid, you know, we need to care about the people in Minneapolis who might get killed, and you know, when more and more of that happens and we become immune to it, we need to be careful about brown-colored people, Spanish-accented people, because if we just focus on our Jewish thing, it'll be that, oh, when they came for me, who was there to speak for
Oh, I
me?
think it's there. Oh, no, of course, it's the marginalization of anyone. So thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope that met
Yes,
your.
it was fantastic,
All
yes.
right. Okay.
Please